From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Fazende, riding shotgun as he does each and every podcast. This is Andre Johnson.
Jr.
Do not forget the Jr. is very important to remember the JR at the end of the name. Before we get into today's content, be sure to like, share, rate, review. If you are watching us on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Get the bell notification for when we drop that fire content. And today, it's Friday. I've been looking forward to this Friday because it gets closer and closer to the weekend, and I finally have a couple days off. My goodness, what a stretch it has been for us. First Super Bowl week, then Kellen Moore week in the city of New Orleans, and also you have Nola Gold week this week, so that's starting as well. So it has been an absolute just train of events the last 2 weeks, big-time events, and so I'm looking forward to this weekend, but for now, we got a pod to do, and we got a very important podcast to do because the Saints have a new head coach, and we met him for the first time. Well, maybe not the first time, but he was introduced as Saints head coach on Thursday, so we got to talk about that. But how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling good. You know, you mentioned last week, obviously, the sports department, there's no days off when the Super Bowl is in New Orleans, whether the Saints are playing or not. So it was a lot of long days, which, again, you can't really complain about because it's the Super Bowl. So now we're back the next week. We got to deal with Kellen Moore mania. We've got the Nola Gold fresh on the Gulf Coast Sports and Entertainment Network this weekend. So I'm really excited for that. It's a fun time in New Orleans, and the Pelicans even won a basketball game last night.
Also, I forgot to say hello to the Gulf Coast Sports Entertainment Network. It's a part of our opening intro here, and I just forgot to say hi. So hi to the Gulf Coast Sports Entertainment Network. Glad you have found us here, as you will find Pelicans games, Nola Gold. Is it matches?
Matches.
Yeah,
on the
Nola
pitch.
Gold on the pitch out there on the gold mine on airline. All right, so what do you want to talk about? I think we know what we talk about. We're going to talk about Kellen Moore in that doggone press conference. He talked for 40 minutes. Thought he carried himself pretty well. Touched on a lot of topics, but there's one topic everyone is talking about today, and, of course, that's where we're going to go with the big picture.
Yeah, you know, Kellen Moore, a former quarterback. So obviously one of the first questions at the top of a lot of people's minds are, what's Kellen Moore going to do at the quarterback position? Right now, the Saints have Derek Carr, but will Moore opt to keep Carr? Will Moore opt to move on? Now, before we get into that, there's a bit of misinformation or badly explained information that you may have seen on social media going around from the generic, NFL rumor Twitter site saying Saints can clear $30 million by cutting Derek Carr. So everybody that I've seen has been screaming, cut Carr, cut Carr, cut Carr. Whether you cut Carr or not, it's important to understand that $30 million is only if the Saints do it as a post-June 1st cut, which means that when they cut Derek Carr in February or March, they're not getting $30 million. They're really only getting about $2 million back. The $30 million will clear on June 2nd, which is cool if you've got a lot of cap room. It's not cool if you're $60 million over the cap and you have to clear that by March 12th. Yeah. So cutting Derek Carr and getting that quote-unquote $30 million will not help you clear the $60 million that you need to have cleared by March 12th. So cutting Derek Carr to clear $30 million to get back under the cap, not an option for the Saints because by the time they get the money, they wouldn't need it anymore. Free agent would have came and gone. The draft would have came and gone. It would be a very different set of circumstances, which takes us back to the big picture topic with a new head coach in the building, Kellen Moore. What do you think he will opt to do?
Well, I will get
Derek
to
Carr?
what you said there in just a second because I have a little bit of mostly agreement, but also a little bit of slight pushback. But let's just start from the top. Interesting press conference, as we mentioned, 40, 45 minutes of talking. You know, I don't think he didn't come across as a shy person or a kind of a meek person. He came across as a guy pretty confident, but I don't think he's like Mr. Talker, if you will. I think he was a guy that spoke pretty quickly, got in and out of his questions and answers. In fact, one of the questions I asked him was, do you think how close do you think this team is to being a contender? That was one of his longest answers. He brought up very close because he felt like what he saw in week 3 gave them a lot of hope as far as what type of roster the Saints currently have. But of course, what everyone is talking about since that press conference ended are his comments about Derek Carr. So We are going to play those comments and talk about those comments now.
I view it as Derek Carr is a tremendous starting quarterback in this league. We're fortunate to have him, and we're excited to go through this process, as we build this roster together. Again, I'm meeting these guys for the first time the last few days. I'm really excited to meet more of them, and this will be a lot of fun. Derek's a tremendous quarterback in this league. I've had so much respect for him, the journey that he's been on. He's a starter in this league. He's a premier player in this league. He's had a great journey, obviously going from Fresno State to the Raiders and now here. Really excited to team up with him and go through this process. And so just like any player on this roster, I just got here a few days ago, and I'm excited to go through this journey with all of them.
Did you get all that? Very, very, very hard to decipher which way Kellen Moore was leaning. Definitely left it open-ended.
Oh, yeah, that door's wide open.
He was my goodness, as down the middle as you could possibly be. He certainly did not definitively say, bang the table, Derek Carr is my starting quarterback in 2025 and beyond. I believe in him, and he certainly had the chance to do so. But he also said phrases like excited to team up with him and go through the process. What does that mean exactly? I have no idea. When I heard excited to team up with him and go through the process, I don't know. There was other talk about, excited to have him or happy to have him, something like that, or we're glad we have him, something like that. But then go through the process. He kind of tagged it out with go through the process, go through the process. Does that mean meet, discuss the future, and then decide from there? Who knows? He certainly left it open-ended. I do think it really highlights, though, just how complex or complicated this probably is as an organizational decision. It's probably the most important organizational decision they're going to make this offseason. And I have long said, both on this podcast and just in general, people want to talk to me because people want to talk to me a lot about the Saints because it's a lot going on, and fellow media members, people I see out and about. And it's hard to really have a firm discussion with them without truly going down the rabbit hole, but that's what it requires because of how complex the situation is. There is no easy answer when it comes to quarterback in 2025. If you want to, hey, 2025 is my first year, I don't want to waste no time. I want to win. Well, if you're Kellen Moore and get cap compliant, by the way, then Carr may be the best option because Carr is of the realistic options. This is not talking about if the Patrick Mahomes became a free agent. I'm talking about realistic options. Based on what's realistically available, Carr may be the best option if you just look at what you have on your roster right now, based on their track record, what one quarterback has done, what the other two quarterbacks have not done, plus that restructure of Derek Carr's contract, which he's not coming back on the same contract, guys. It's going to be a restructure. That's a guarantee. Would take the Saints, you said 60. The last number I saw was 54.
Yeah.
So 54 to all the way down to like $29 million over. So that is your biggest piece in getting cap compliant is the Derek Carr, not cut, not trade. It is the restructure. But we obviously know there are risks involved with that. It adds future dead money. We know that. It also keeps a 34-year-old quarterback who was durable before he got here, but the last 2 years have certainly had his bad luck when it comes to injuries. If you want to move on from Carr, that's certainly Kellen Moore is right. He wants to start fresh. But we've already explained, you've kind of gone into it a little bit, how difficult it can be done, but how difficult it could be, the incredibly high amount of moves that it would take to get under the salary cap in time is massive. Now, I don't know this person personally, but there's a great write-up by John Sigler on the Saints Wire. He pops up on my algorithm quite a bit, so I'm familiar with his work, but he really did a nice job of laying it all out. We've tried to lay it out on this podcast, but honestly, when you're broadcasting numbers, it can get a little tedious. But when you write it out, it really made sense what he did. So shout out to him for that. It really was a good explanation on just how many moves have to be made in order to offset.
It's a lot.
It is a lot. The dead money hit you're taking on from Derek Carr, even if you do it post June 1st designation. And like you said, please, if you're out there, stop saying the Saints get $30 million in cap relief if they move on from Carr. That is so disingenuous. Yes, they get it, but they don't get it till after June 1st. So you got to go from 54 to 0 without touching Derek Carr. You don't get any relief.
By the way, Derek Carr actually gets to be a free agent whenever you cut him in
And
February
he can
or
sign
March.
wherever he wants.
So he'll be wherever he wants, but you'll still be carrying that till June 2nd.
So that's my point. Is you still, and that's what that article really does a nice job of. It goes into like 4 or 5 restructures that make sense. 4 or 5 restructures of guys that are over the age of 32 years old, which is what you want to stay away from, which is what got him into this mess to begin with. So there is no easy option when it comes to that. If Moore wants to find his guy, I'm a new head coach. I want to find my Breeze. I want to find my Mahomes. I want to find my guy I can give the ball to for the next decade, and we roll together. We've seen it happen here. Well, is there really that guy in the draft for them at 9? Unless Ward or Sanders falls to them, unless they want to make an aggressive move and go up. But I don't know if you just looked at it right now, you said, and that would be your plan. I don't know if that's the most logical plan.
That would be comparable to the Panthers a few years ago being at 9. They moved up to 1 to get Bryce Young. It took them their best receiver, and it took them, I believe, 2 firsts.
It took a lot.
It took
to
a
go
lot.
up and get
And
it.
right now,
And
Chicago's winning
there's
that
the other
deal.
thing. What you have to give up to go up and do something like that. I mean, Jackson Dart, we've already talked about Jackson Dart. I personally like him, but not as I've made it very clear, not as a top 10 pick. So what free agents are available? Because remember back in 06 when they got here, they didn't go draft. They went free agent and they got Drew Brees, and we all know the rest is history. But what does that doesn't happen. I mean, that's a 1 in a million thing. It really is. It's such an outlier. That's 1 in a million thing. So what does the free agent market look like? Sam Darnold,
Justin Fields,
Justin
maybe.
Fields, Daniel Jones. I mean, it's rare that the quarterback free agent market is ever good because usually franchises don't let those guys walk. But I think Sam Darnold will probably get a higher price tag than you would be willing to pay. Justin Fields, okay. And then Daniel Jones, whatever. So there's nothing really obvious out there in the free agent market. Now, do they want to sacrifice 2025 and look ahead to the 2026 draft? Well, then what do? Well, is it just at that case, let's just see how Spencer Rattler does. Roll with him in 2025. Worst comes to worst, he's a bad starting quarterback, and we get 3 or 4 wins. I think who was the starter in Washington before James? Was it Sam Howell? Maybe similar to that sort of situation. And then if he does well, maybe we got our guy. But if we on a rookie deal at a very comparable price, if he does bad, hey, we get a top 5 pick. I could see the logic in that. I really could. And maybe you end up at the top of the draft next year in a deeper quarterback class. Look, maybe that is the way they want to go. It's impossible to know. And there's also the other factor, and we've talked about this many times. To me, it was one of Kellen Moore's biggest strengths. But in this scenario, it also makes it much harder to predict which way he wants to go. Is his own coaching history doesn't truly reveal a style of quarterback he wants to go with. I mean, he had Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, and Jalen Hurts. They are 3 completely different kind of quarterbacks. I mean, you wouldn't put any one of those in the same category. You really would not, with their style of play and the way they approach the game and the way you coach those players and the way you call plays for those players. So, a long way of saying, as I sit here right now, I truly do not know which way Kellen Moore is going to go when it comes to Derek Carr or the Saints quarterback situation. There are legit reasons to move on from Carr. There are legit reasons to keep Carr. Now, is it possible that they truly don't know what they're going to do at quarterback yet? I find it hard to believe, but I guess it's possible. But I have a feeling Moore has an idea of what he wants to do. He was a quarterback, a very good one at the collegiate level, one of the faces of college football at the collegiate level during that year for a very fun program. And let's not forget, you don't make the meteoric rise that he made in coaching without a plan that you can sell. So I think that plan has been sold. And I am just so curious what decision it's going to be, because this is the biggest decision they're going to make the entire offseason for the franchise. And I don't think there's a clear answer. I think there are big pluses and big minuses to both sides of this. So what's he going to do with Derek Carr? My final answer, I have no idea.
Let me be clear. I understand the fans wanting to move on from Derek Carr. I just think that there's a way that you do it. And I don't think the way that you do it is this offseason. I think you keep Carr for this season. You move on from him next season when it's a lot easier financially to do so. Now, from what I've seen, just looking around, talking to Saints fans, the narratives going around, there's 3 reasons that people may want to cut Carr. Number one, there are some fans who just don't think he's a good quarterback, which I think is probably the most nonsensical reason to cut Carr, because the Saints are not bad because of Derek Carr.
Right.
The Saints had a bottom 3 defense last year. The Saints had injuries all across the roster. Now, you could argue Derek Carr is not good enough to take you to 12-5, to take you to the postseason, to take you to the Super Bowl. You could certainly say that, and I understand that. But saying Derek Carr is a bad quarterback, I want to cut him, I want him off my team, Derek Carr is not the reason that the Saints are losing. Derek Carr may not be the reason the Saints are winning as much as you want them to, but he's not the reason that they're losing. Second reason is because, and this is a big fan perspective, almost because he's too good. Because a lot of fans want that top 3 draft pick next year. And look at what Derek Carr has done with the Saints. He's not, above and beyond his crazy winning record, but he doesn't have a bad losing record with the Saints either. He's been pretty much middle of the road.
14-13.
Exactly, middle of the road when it comes to wins and losses. Derek Carr, with this Saints roster right now, can probably go out and get you about 7 wins next year.
I would agree. Yeah.
And that's not what fans who want to see them get the number 1, the number 2, or the number 3 pick so that they can get one of those highly touted quarterbacks want to see. That's why another group of fans may want to cut Carr. I can understand why fans think that way, but you've got to understand that fans can afford to think that way. Management cannot afford to think that way. Mickey Loomis can't afford to think that way. Kellen Moore can't afford to think that way. And a quarterback, whether it's Spencer Rattler or whoever it is, that would go 2-15 for you to get that number 1 pick, they can't afford to think that way because that's their career out the window.
That's the other thing, right?
And then the third camp that wants to see Carr cut, that's the probably the loudest camp that thinks Spencer Rattler is the future of the franchise. And while Spencer Rattler has played well at times last season, while Spencer Rattler has earned a shot, if Carr was to get cut, at that starting job, to say that, oh, yeah, we've seen enough from Spencer Rattler to say he's our future of the franchise. We're going to send that kid out there. We're going to let him start 17 games, and we're going to see how far he can take us. Based off what? Yes, he did some good things last year. Yes, he made some good throws last year. He made a lot of bad throws last year as well. He showed that he still has a lot to learn. Right now, I'm not even sure Spencer Rattler can be a consistently good backup quarterback in the league, let alone a starting quarterback that can take your franchise anywhere that you want to go. So when I look at all 3 of the camps that seem like they want to cut Derek Carr right now, none of them really make more sense to me than probably the most obvious answer, which is just to ride this thing out with Carr 1 more year, get him off the books next year when it's a lot easier to do so financially, and you go from there. This is not a rebuild that's going to happen in 1 year. This is not we're just going to make this move and draft this guy, and next thing you know, we're 11-6 and we're back in the playoff picture. It's going to take a while. It may be ugly for a while, but we've seen teams go through these type of rebuilds and come out on the other side. Look at the Washington Commanders.
No doubt. And there are other things as well. Like, let's just say you go with Carr. And there's a lot of old players on this roster that didn't get younger; they got older this year.
Yeah.
So my point is, you could go with Carr and still lose. Like, you really could. You could go with Carr and still lose, and still end up with that top 10 pick that you covered. There are other things as well. I was thinking about this the other day because I look with the whole the theme was youth, the theme was new, the theme was fresh start. All that stuff. Maybe there's a fresh way of looking at the draft. And if there was ever a year to trade back in the draft, we're gonna have several pods on this, I can promise you. Excuse me. But there was ever a year to trade back in the draft from where you're at in the top 10 back to, say, the mid-teens or whatever the case may be, it would be this year, in my opinion. And what if, I'll just play devil's advocate here. Of course, we're getting a little farther down the rabbit hole, but again, this is kind of what we do here. What if you were trading back, one of the offers was, a third rounder, let's go from 9 to 18, a third rounder, or 9 to 20 and a third rounder, plus next year's one. Then you're set because there's no guarantee that team would be good or bad.
Right.
And then you would have obviously 2 first-round picks, but you can use some ammunition to go up and get your guy if you wanted to do that for the 2026 quarterback. It's just, I know it's a little far down, but I'm saying there's a lot of different things that could happen where you could still end up getting what you ultimately want, which is what, let's be clear on that. No one here is saying Derek Carr is the future. No one here is saying Spencer Rattler is the future. I think ultimately, within that Saints organization, they want in unison to all have a guy they believe in for the next decade.
I could tell you who the future is. The future is sitting in a college classroom,
Right.
probably thinking about what he's going to do for his girlfriend today on Valentine's Day. That's the future of this franchise. He is not wearing black and gold right now.
So that's the ultimate goal, right? That's where you want to get to. What's the path to get there? And also, oh, by the way, you got to navigate the messiest salary cap situation in the NFL by a mile. So Kellen Moore understands this more than anybody else. I mean, more than anyone else in that building. He knows he's got to get that guy. And he's had success everywhere he's been because he had that guy. And every stop, that organization believed in that player. So hopefully the Saints will find a way to get that guy. Now, does the process of getting to that guy ultimately mean Derek Carr is back in 2025 starting? Spencer Rattler back in 2025 starting? Random free agent quarterback, veteran like Tanner McKee or Kenny Pickett or Justin Fields being that guy starting?
Kenny Pickett, an important name, by the way. I know we can laugh off Kenny Pickett, but he just played under Kellen Moore in Philadelphia, and he speaks of his coach very glowingly. If his coach views Kenny Pickett the same way, it wouldn't be a shocker to see him come over.
And then potentially be, find your guy and get your guy in next year's draft. I don't know. So I think that's what the Saints have to figure out. But I think as we've just laid out, it's not as simple as let's just get rid of this guy and let's just see what else we got. There are a lot of factors involved. By the way, factors that precede Derek Carr, that precede a lot of players that are currently on the roster. This is all years of constant restructures and constant reshuffling and constant doing the thing, adding voidable years. I mean, when you're doing that, that's what happens when eventually the bill becomes due. You get in a situation like this where there are no easy answers. So I'm very curious to see what the Saints do because I just think it's the most important thing they're going to do this year. And I'm also very curious, whatever decision they make, doesn't it feel a little temporary? Because it almost feels like whatever they do in 2025 is just setting the table for what they really want to do in 2026 at that position. So I'm very curious to see what happens. One other thing I wanted to throw out there from that press conference was he talked a lot of different topics, pretty quick on his answers. Praised AK, praised Taysom Hill. I loved his answers there. The whole league's been trying to find AKs. The whole league's been trying to find Taysom Hills. But one thing he definitively said about style of offense, and I noticed it in the Super Bowl when they would go from second to third down, he says tempo. Tempo is the one thing that's been the constant thread in all of his offenses. So it doesn't matter if you use a lot of motion, less motion, outside zone, gap, whatever the case may be, West Coast principles, all those things. Tempo, tempo, tempo. And then there's a stat out there. I got to find it. How in most of his years as a coordinator, he was top 10 in plays run, I believe it was. So you talk about a guy that knows how to score points because he knows how to keep his offense on the field. And you have offensive plays, usually you score more points.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and like you said, when you look at this quarterback situation, there's not necessarily an easy answer. And that's why I think the easiest answer is the one you go with, which is keep Carr around for one more year and set the table for the quarterback that will come in. Because me and my friends have this discussion in the group message. We always bump heads about when you draft a new quarterback, do you kind of build the team first and then pick the quarterback, or do you pick the quarterback and then build the team? A lot of teams will draft that rookie quarterback and they get to a bad roster that doesn't have much around him and he doesn't have that early success compared to a team that has kind of set the table like Chicago tried to do for Caleb Williams, and you bring him in and he has maybe an easier time off the bat. Like Jaden Daniels comes in and he's got Brian Robinson, he's got Terry McLaurin, he's got, a solid offensive line out there. So this is the time where you can set the table for that quarterback, that face of the franchise when you ultimately bring him in. This is where you're looking around and you're like, okay, we do have the 9th pick in this draft. Whether you trade back and get a guy I like a lot in Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State, the receiver, I like him a lot, and you can probably get him between 15 and 20. Whether you take the guy I'm really high on at 9, Ashton Jeanty, and you've got a running back, behind whichever quarterback that is, you need playmakers. And that was the issue a lot this past season. You didn't have a lot of playmakers. When Taysom Hill went down, we were looking around and we're like, well, what do? You can't give the ball to Alvin Kamara 30 times. And there were actually games where they did give the ball to Alvin Kamara 30 times because you didn't have any other option. And then next thing you knew, Chris Olave goes down, Rashid Shaheed goes down, you lose your deep threat. So this is the time where you can start grabbing receivers, where you can grab a running back that you hope can be generational, where you can grab a tight end, a position where this team has struggled ever since Jimmy Graham left in his prime, where you can maybe build along that offensive line, because the biggest problem last year was the most predictable problem at the beginning of the season, and that was offensive line depth. So this is the time where you can set that table.
Look, let me just say, if it were me, and I can already feel the rage in the comments, they're probably already up there right now based on what you said alone.
Yeah, I know.
But let me just go ahead and say, like, I would rather
one more
restructure a couple guys with Carr and like 2 or 3 others, or maybe 4 others, and riding it that way and getting salary cap compliant, as opposed to restructuring like 15 or 16 guys. And still, I'm not even sure that it would offset enough to even enjoy the $30 million you would get on the other side of June 1st if you were able to do it that way. So yeah, I'm with you. I would, and I've looked at all options because I think there's risk involved with Carr as well. I would probably roll one more year with Derek Carr on a restructured contract. All right, I'm sure they're going to agree with us. I know they love when we talk about this. So anyway, for Andre Johnson Jr., I'm Sean Fazende. We will catch you guys next time on Overtime.